Welcome to another episode, everyone. In this episode, we're going to look at these little devices called DF Player Minis. They're going to allow you to add sound to your projects, just like I did with 3PO over here. Oh, it's going to be fine, don't worry. I had the opportunity to meet the 3PO, Anthony Daniels, at a Maker Faire one year. It was just an amazing experience. So let's get started.
Is there anything I might do to help?
Sure, you can help a lot. Today we're going to be learning about an Arduino Nano. It's a replacement for the Uno. It's a very useful little microcontroller because it's small and it's inexpensive, especially compared to the Uno, and it's very low profile. All you need to do is solder on these little pins that come with it, and you're ready to go. So there's 15 pins on each side. And if you don't like soldering, you can buy these pre-soldered so that you don't have to do any soldering. But I like to get them without the pins on because sometimes I use them in this low profile setting where I just attach wires to these little pads right along here. Now, the Nano is super useful because it's so tiny and very, very easy to program. So I'm going to show you that. But everything I teach you here can be used with the Uno as well. So if you don't have a Nano right now or you're waiting for some to come in, just go ahead and use your Uno and build the circuit that way. And then later on, you can switch it over to a Nano. So all you have to do is attach these onto the back. So they just plug right in like that. And then you solder along the top edge, all of these pads. But as you can see, you might be soldering in a bit of a weird angle if you're not careful. So I'm just going to show you right now how to line these up and solder them perfectly every time so that you don't have to worry about stuff like that. The best way to attach your pins to your Nano is to first put the header pins all into a breadboard, just the right distance apart so that your Nano can fit on it. And then just add your Nano on top of that and you know your pins are straight up and down. From there, we're just going to put some solder on all of the pins, and what I use is 0.6mm lead-free solder, and then I just heat up the pin as well as the pad at the same time to get them to the right temperature. It's important to do that before you start adding the solder. And you don't want to add a lot of solder, you just want to make sure you get a little volcano-shaped cone on the pads when you're finished. They should all pretty much look the same. And with a bit of practice, you'll get very good at this. And it'll just take a few minutes to add all of the pins to your Arduino Nano. It's time to add sound to our projects. We're going to be using the DF Player Mini. It's a very tiny little device that looks like this. It's 21mm by 21mm, and it's got 8 pins on either side of it. It requires up to 5 volts, and we're going to be using 5 volts with it in our projects. And it depends on what the sound level is that you're going to be using as to how much current it's going to draw, but it's around up to 500 milliamps or so. It also needs a micro SD card. You need to put in one that is up to 32 gigabytes. I often use like 8 to 10. If you can still find some small SD cards, that's totally fine. It all depends on how many songs you want on your card. And it has to be formatted in the FAT16 or FAT32 format. We'll talk more a little bit about that later. The audio files have to be in MP3 or WAV format, so that's important to know. So if you don't have them in that format, there are ways on the internet to convert them into that format so you can use them. The cool thing about the DF Player, it has a built-in amplifier. So it's fairly loud, and I've used it just the way it is in a lot of my projects. But if you're going to be in a large auditorium like a Maker Faire or something like that, you probably want to add an amplifier onto it. If you're using it as is, you can use up to a 3-watt 8-ohm speaker with it. I've done that several times and it's worked out pretty great. Now this is the pinout for the player. It has 8 pins on either side and you can do a multitude of things with this. It can be used as a standalone device. You can activate various songs through buttons on it, We're not going to do all of that in this video. We're just going to use it as an Arduino triggered device because that's what I use it for the most in my animatronics. And we're going to talk about that using these 6 pins. So the top pin is your power coming in, and then you've got a receive and your transmit, and those are going to go to your Arduino to control it. And the bottom 3 are your speaker connections and your ground. So it's pretty easy to connect this little guy up. So let's take a look at the circuit diagram. Now this is on a breadboard, and I've got the Nano hooked up to it. So there's just the Nano, the DF player, a resistor, and some wires. So if you take a look, we are going to power this all up with 5 volts. And that 5-volt rail is going to just come along the bottom there, and it's going to connect to your Arduino Nano and your DF player. So the red and the black connections are your power connections, so you have to make sure that it's powered up with specifically those pins. The speaker connections are the bottom 3 there, the middle one's the ground, but then you've got your speaker connections there. So that's all you have to do for your speaker, pretty easy. Now let's talk a little bit about, how does the DF player get signals from your Arduino Nano? Well, just look at this little section right here. So digital pin 3 is going to be a signal pin. So it's going to transmit the signal through this yellow line here into a resistor. And this resistor can be 1 to 1.5 kilo ohms. And then it goes straight down to the yellow wire here and into your receive pin. So it's transmitting out from the Arduino Nano and it's receiving it into the DF player. And that's how you send all the signals to actually trigger the audio files. And you can tell it, hey, play track number 1, track number 2, or play them all randomly. There's a bunch of different commands that you can send through that. If you're using the transmit from the DF player, this purple line will go into your receive pin on your Arduino Nano. Now in the software, we're going to set up D3 and D4 to be our receive and transmit. It's pretty easy to do. I'll show you how to do that. But from there, you are ready to go, and you can now start sending sounds from your Nano to your DF player. Now that's all well and done, but what if you, by the way, you also make sure you have your 1K resistor there. What if you want to have a standalone device that's not on a breadboard? Say you want to have a permanent printed circuit with this little setup all connected together so that you can just plug it into a droid or some kind of other animatronic that you want to build. Well, that's pretty easy to do, actually. I'm going to show you right now how to add these parts to a circuit board with some other peripheral components that you might need and how to wire all that up. So let's take a look at that next. Well, here's a more permanent solution to the breadboard we've been using. So this is on a circuit board. I've ordered these circuit boards here and I can just solder directly to them. Another option is to have professionally made boards, and you can just come up with a design. There's lots of programs online where you can just design it and then send it off to be made, but then you get multiples back, 5 to 10 or whatever you want. I haven't really done that before because I don't need multiples of what I'm building, except for maybe this guy. I use him a lot, so I could do that, but it's a very simple circuit to make. As you can see, I've got these little connectors here, and I can just plug in power and ground and my speakers. I've got my Nano and my DF player on this little riser right here. I'll show you what that looks like in a second. But then I've got all my wires just from one of these pads to another, and then I solder them all up from underneath. And then I can mount this thing wherever I want with those mounting holes. So I'll just pop off, say, the DF player. You can kind of see what that looks like. So right there you can see I've got the wires going inside this cavity area that's not really being used, and I've got my resistor right in there. And it's a pretty great little system because if anything goes wrong with my DF player or my Nano, I can just pop it off and plug in a new one like that, and I'm ready to go. So I'll just show you, what these parts look like. I've ordered these off Amazon. This is the circuit board. It mimics an actual breadboard, It's got the rows, and then it's got the rails for positive and negative, and it's pretty easy to use. You just solder parts onto here. And as far as the screw terminals go, I've got them right here. So these all come in a little package. There's 3s here, there's 2s here. You can connect them up together too, so that there's a little notch in them so that they can slide together, and then you'll have 4s, and they just plug directly into your board, and then you solder them up from inside. And that way you can just hook up things that you need to, like speakers or power or whatever. And then as far as my header pins go, these are female pin headers, and they come in, you can see 20s here, and there's a 40 pin, a 10 pin, an 8 pin, and they look like this. So you just plop them in, solder them up from inside, and then you can add your components on top of there. If you don't need, this is a 20 pin, if you don't need 20, say you needed 19 or something, like as we're going to be finding out in this project, you can just use a pair of pliers and pull out one of these bottom pins, and you'll just have an empty cavity right there. So that's what I use primarily for my boards, and found that they work very well, and it's a permanent solution if you can fit this board in, or you could cut the board in half and use just half of it if you want. So let's take a look at the actual circuit involved here. Let's take a look at what the circuit board looks like on the actual Proto Board. This is the Proto Board from the front view and the back view, so you can see how all of the rows and rails are connected just like on your breadboard. And they come in various sizes as well. This is just the type that I've been using lately. Now, when you put the parts on here, I just use regular hookup wire, and I just stripped off a little piece and I bent it around so it's nice and neat, soldered into each pad, have my resistor right there, and I also added the screw terminals and color coded them. So I just used a permanent marker and painted the top of this one red for the red rail, and then black for the black. And that way I can plug in an accessory, as we're going to find out in the next video. Let's format our SD card and add our sound clips. So I've got a folder right here, and it's got 6 sound effects in there. And I got these at 101soundboards.com. You're welcome to go take a look at those. These are just some Star Wars sound effects, and I have 6 of them. And as you can see, I've named them, and I've numbered them first of all with a 3-digit number. So the first one is 001 underscore, and then I can give it whatever name I want after that. The next one is 002 underscore, move along, and so on and so on. So it's important that you number them in this 3-digit format. There's a ton of different ways to add files or sound clips to the SD card for the DF player. You can make folders and name all the folders, and there's a naming scheme that you can bring up all of those sound files. I just find the easiest ways to put all of the clips just on the SD card like this and just number them. It's just easier for me. That's the way I use it anyways. So let's format your SD card. And what I use is an SD card formatter. Here's the SD card formatter that I use. I don't rely on the one on my PC, as it's not always reliable, but this one works very well, and it's free off the internet. I posted a link in the description below. So all you have to do is add your SD card to this. So let me just bring this over here and plug in my SD card, and you'll see it'll pop up right here. So you've got two ways to format this. You have a quick format and you have an overwrite format. The overwrite will write over everything that's on there, or erase everything on there and format it. It just takes a little longer. Since this is a new SD card, I'm just going to do the quick format. So I just click format and say, be careful, it's going to erase everything. So yes, and there we go. Everything's erased and formatted in F and FAT32 format, which is perfect for the DF player. It's now time to save our sound files to the SD drive, and I have a folder here with 6 sound files that I'd like to add to my SD card. You have to name your sound files with a 3-digit number, so 001, 002, and so on. And then you can also add the actual name of what the sound file is right after that. Now the next specific thing you have to do is these will not be in this order if you just drag them all to this folder right here. You have to actually drag them in the order that you want them to appear or to be assigned those numbers. So just drag them like that, and the order that they're dragged over is the order that they will be able to be called up from your Arduino program. Here we are with the setup. One thing you have to remember before you use your Nano is you have to go up to Tools and make sure that you have selected from Arduino AVR boards the Nano. So you'd go to AVR boards and you choose the Nano, as well as the COM port that you've got connected to. Now usually on an Uno it will say Arduino Uno. It doesn't on here, so you have to know which COM port. You just try the two, one of the two or three or whatever, till you get one that works before you do your upload. So I've got volume 25 set here. I've got my USB jack plugged into my computer. Normally I would have the power supply plugged into my positive and negative rail, but I'm just using power from my computer right now. So let's do an upload and see how this functions. I'm just going to go to upload and see if it'll play track 6.
Fear is the path to the dark side.
Awesome. So that is track 6. Let's take a look at maybe track number 2. Let's try that one. And notice that I'm not putting zeros in here beforehand. I'm just putting 2. I'm not putting 002. That's important as well. So let's upload that and see if it plays track 2. Okay, that is track 2. Let's see what happens if we just put in, say, track 7. There is no track 7, but we'll see what will happen here. Nothing. So that's pretty predictable. That's how you set up your DF player with an Arduino, just to make sure it's working and you're uploading properly. So that's a great little basic sketch. From here, we're going to move on to something a little bit different, where you can have it play a bunch of different tracks at a certain time. That's what I use a lot in my projects. Whenever people are walking up to my droid, it will start shooting off different sound effects. So let's take a look at that. Funny story. I just want to show you something that happened in my last batch of DF Player Minis that I ordered. Normally they were working very good up till now, but I received some that didn't work at all, and I couldn't figure out why. The chipset looked okay. I did notice something though that I want to point out in case this happens to you. When you use a DF player, you don't even need a Nano. You could use it without a Nano. What you could do is just put a wire from here or a button from here to here. This is another ground wire. So if you add a wire from here to here, it would play the next track. If you put a wire from here to here, it'll play the previous track. So I downloaded the sketch, the basic sketch, nothing happened. And what I did is I just crossed these two terminals right here and it started to play. And I thought, oh, that's great. So it works on its own. But then when I downloaded the sketch again, it worked again. So the program started working. So all I had to do was activate this player by just connecting these two terminals right here, and it started to work. I thought, that's kind of weird. Let me try a different one. So I popped this guy out. I put the other DF player in that I got because I bought a pack of 5. Same thing. It didn't work at all until I started it up with these two, and then it worked from there on. So if that ever happens to you, you can try that. You also have to make sure that all of these little pins here are soldered. I did receive a batch where some of them were not soldered, so it didn't work at all. So sometimes it's hit and miss, but usually these are pretty good little units, so that's something to keep an eye out for. I'd like to know what you're going to be using this little DF Player Mini with in your project, so please add that to the comments below. Well, that wraps up another episode, everyone. If you want to know how I made 3PO, take a look at the video up here. Next time, we're going to look at adding sensors to the circuit. Yeah, so that you can trigger all the different sound effects via motion sensing, things like that. So until then, God bless you, and we'll see you next time on Learn Animatronics.
I see your point, sir.
Thanks.